welcome to the Performance Cafe. Specifically, I'd like to welcome you to this very special edition of Coffee Companions on a Friday, the series where we share coffee, biscuits and learnings as we talk about human performance in organizations. And today, I'm so pleased that we're joined by Caryn Schalit. So Caryn grew up in HR and talent acquisition and more recently managed the global people function of a growing mid-sized enterprise for 7 years. She embraces non-traditional HR thinking and believes passionately in helping shape people practices, talent acquisition, and talent management in order to ensure they're relevant and designed with the future of work in mind. In her career, Caryn has worked in a variety of ways as a remote worker, an independent contractor, a permanent in-office employee, and as a part-time employee. So she's lived the subject of blended workforces and has personal experience of what makes them successful. And Caryn and I worked together. In fact, she was my boss, so I better put my best foot forward when we were working together at VentureWeb. And on that point, hello, Caryn, and welcome.
Thank you. And how lovely to join you in your cafe.
Yes, it's doing really well. Even though lockdown has ended, I still spend a lot of time in here. I don't think they'll let me out.
I see it. I have my cup of the good stuff, and I'm ready to get started.
Awesome. So tell us about your cup, because I find cups revealing. What's on your cup?
So this cup says, firstly, I love it because it's like full of diversity images, and it says Lady Legend. The lady is crossed out and it's just got legend, because actually, if you're a legend, you're a legend. Whether you're a female or male, makes no difference.
I hear you. I love that, Mike. Thanks for sharing that. So, Caryn, your bio, I know you very well, but is there anything in your bio that sort of glossed over that you'd like to add? To tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So, I have been, I got into HR really through, it was very designed that I got into HR. I never fell into it. Lots of people just fall into HR because they're doing other functions in the business, and suddenly they just realize this is what they want to do. But actually, I always knew that this was what I wanted to do. So there was never any doubt in my mind that I was going to land up in this career, and I've embraced that. And my journey has just taken me on, it's really taken me, I think, through so many different functions in the HR space. And I'm loving where we find ourselves in the moment in HR. There is just so much new, fresh thinking around. There's so much tech to enable, HR professionals. And I also think that, the spotlight has been so much on HR professionals, in this time of COVID. And that's been really interesting to see, actually, is how HR has been pushed to the fore. So, personally, I'm loving this stage. I love nothing more than a bit of spotlight. And so this has been good for all of us.
Lovely. And of course, this is not entirely new to you and I, but I wanted to ask you, let's talk blended workforces, because really that is one of your very strong suits, other than, of course, the diversity and inclusion that you've spoken about already. What does it mean for, we've lived it, but what does it mean for people who have only now sort of woken up to the possibility of remote work?
Yes, I think it's interesting. A couple of years ago, it was really the first time that I'd heard about this workforce being classified. And, then it was classified as a contingent workforce. And actually, there is still an organization and an association in the UK, I think it is, that actually it produces a lot of white papers and does a lot of research on the contingent workforce, which is what they call it specifically. But it's interesting, I think, to see how it's changed shape. So it's got many different names. It can be called the gig economy. It can be called the liquid workforce. It can be called an agile workforce, an on-demand workforce. And there's so many different terms for it. And I think that it's become really relevant as technology has been able to enable it, and as companies have woken up to the fact that actually they don't need a sort of 100-person permanent headcount anymore. And I think this also comes from the fact that companies need to be agile and they need to be flexible and they need to be able to pivot quickly. And when you've got a huge complement of permanent staff, it becomes very hard to do that, especially when your staff are not skilled up in the new areas that you want to move into. That demands a whole restructure, and that's very taxing on a business, and it's very mentally draining, I think, on employees in a business. So an agile workforce actually, the gig economy works really well for organizations. It has worked well in the past, and I think it's a new concept in South Africa that's really going to take hold.
That's amazing. So let's just quickly talk about all of those terms that we bandied about, because we're speaking about blended workforces, work from home, gig economy, independent contractors, contingent workforces. There's a lot in there. What does that all mean, and what are the parameters for this?
So, I think companies really are doing this in a number of different ways. I read an article the other day that said that Deloitte's have actually called, have sort of said that all of they're closing, I think, 3 offices in the UK, 3 of their big offices in the UK, and everyone's going to move to a work from home situation. So I think that's the one thing that you get is a work from home. I think the other thing that but in work from home, often people are located in the same geography. The other thing you get is a sort of an interchangeable work from home and an office-based environment. And I think this is where companies have chosen to take smaller offices. And so they have their teams on a rotational basis. And actually Accenture have done this really, really well, where teams are in the office on ad hoc days, and then on those days other teams are working from home, and so they switch it out. And then you get a fully remote workforce, which is very interesting. And companies like GitHub have done this really successfully, where they're fully remote. They don't really have any offices at all. And then you get companies where there is a blend of having some core functions from the office, and then they actually have some other functions that are part of maybe more of a fluid workforce, where they call in the skills on demand as they need them. So I think there's different approaches that companies have taken. And personally, I think a blended workforce, which really involves a blend of all of those things, is the best of all worlds. I think it's best for the business. I think it's best for society. And I think it's best for the individuals, who work in those roles.
Now that we've got our head around some of the terminology, I think most people, when you were talking about that, might have broken out in hives, because how do we it's difficult enough to performance manage someone in the office. What happens with performance management in blended workforces, where I've got potentially someone sitting in an office, someone who's a local work from home setup, and then I might have someone overseas who contracts in for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a challenge. In fact, I think there are lots of operational challenges for companies, in employing a blended workforce. I mean, firstly, let's just break down that term, employing. Lots of these engagements are not actually about employment. They are about just engaging the services of an individual or a team of individuals. And it's really about building out studios of skills that can deliver on certain projects.
You're quite right, because maybe the concept of employment is slightly outmoded.
Yeah, I mean, there was I listened to an HBR podcast actually, which was about more than just remote working or working from home. It was actually about work from anywhere. And, this particular social scientist who has been investigating this, and I can't remember his name at the moment, but he's done a lot of research on this actually, and so he's advocating for a work from anywhere type of situation, and he thinks that's going to be the next step. So that's going to be the next thing that comes after work from home. And he said something interesting, and I wrote it down, and I'd love to just repeat it because I think it's very relevant to this conversation, which is we need to shift from viewing the organization as a place containing employees who do work to one that organizes work and talents. this new thinking needs to see it as a fixed set of functions that determines what is done in-house or through some sort of external mechanism, which includes the gig economy, contract employees, and outsourcing. And I think that's exactly, like, for me, he just hit the nail on the head. Because actually, I think it has become an outdated thing almost. And I think companies that want to move quickly, and I mean, let's face it, that's what companies have to do to be competitive. If you have to move quickly, you need to be able to tap into those skills immediately. And while I would never, say that there's no place for learning and development, there absolutely is still place for learning and development of those core functions. They still need to be better, and they still need to grow, and they still need all those opportunities and sort of learning opportunities. I think exactly what he says is that we need to see the workplace now as an organization that organizes work and talent. And I think that's the difference. And I think also that whole thing around working a 9-to-5 day and, having to clock in and clock out all required a certain amount of management. And I think the fact that, you have a workforce on demand who can offer you the skill, as you need it, which enables you as an organization and enables your team to be able to deliver, I think is so critical for businesses to see that. But going back to your question about how do you performance manage them, I think it's a good one. And I think this is exactly where technology comes in. If you have the right tools in place, you can absolutely do this. I think companies have generally been grappling with how do they performance manage their teams. Managers who have a very traditional view of management do want to walk the floor, and they do want to see that their people are there, and they do want to be able to know that, so-and-so spending 8 hours on the job, or so-and-so slacking off. And when people are working behind closed doors, they don't know that. So I think a culture of accountability and a culture of ownership and a culture of delivery definitely will drive the right culture for this kind of blended work environment where actually people have accountability to deliver. And, generally freelancers and people who form part of this gig economy, their reputation is at stake if they don't deliver. And so they generally are very driven, and the performance management, I think, needs to happen more around your core functions and your employees to make sure that they are working effectively with the external resources that you are bringing in to supplement the lack of skill, or the surge capacity, or whatever it might be.
So, Caryn, just an interesting one. Not that we discussed it, but something that does often come up is it's easy to performance manage, for example, some of the contractors that I worked with when we were working together, because these are mature people who have worked in a corporate to understand the requirements and, the restrictions. What's the one thing that I need to know if I'm taking someone into my business who's fresh out of school, fresh out of university? How do I set them up for success in a remote work environment when they don't know what it's like to have the discipline, the consistency, and the routine around them?
Yeah, so I would actually buddy them up with someone. I might buddy them up with someone who is able to give them input as to how things work in terms of your water cooler conversations, virtual water cooler conversations for that matter. How to connect, someone who can really help them, I think, with the day-to-day running of their role and the operations of the role. And then I think somebody who can mentor them, someone who's done the remote working thing, whether it's work from home or just general remote working from somewhere else. I think someone who can really mentor them and show them and teach them how to structure their day, how to make sure they don't get distracted. Even Microsoft has got so many different tools that you can use to make sure that you have focused time and that you're not getting distracted by other things around you. So, and I think there's lots to it. I think even just making sure that somebody is set up correctly at home or wherever they're working from is important. And that in itself raises a whole lot of other questions just from an operational perspective. How do you actually, bring in people to work from home or to work remotely or whatever it might be? But I think there could be sort of a two-pronged approach to a very junior, sort of fresh out of school, someone who's never stepped in an office, never mind, worked in a remote role. So a buddy approach from an operations perspective, and then a mentor who can mentor them on some of those other finer points. I think is important to have both.
Lovely, yes, and I can see that happen, and I think they can also see how it's lived. It's very different to put it in the induction document. It's totally different when you see someone having to take the call at the odd hour because they're in a totally different time zone.
Exactly, and I mean, you and I know from our time working together that we've heard some really interesting stories about things people have done to make sure that they can take the call and that there are no distractions. But we also know that there've been people who've taken calls from the side of cricket fields. There was one contractor who went onto the roof of her house to take a call because the kids were bothering her or something, and she actually climbed onto the roof so that they could
She was in
find
the
her.
bath. She went and lay in the bath because it was the only place that was sounding from her children. It's like, where are you? I'm in the bath. But look, it worked. At least it was soundproof from the children.
Exactly. So they have those challenges too, and I think lots of freelancers choose to work from home. Lots of people that are part of this gig economy are working from home, and I think more so than ever, actually. I think as a result of just sort of the times that we're living in, and people having lost work or and are now choosing because companies are so much more open to it, are now choosing to rather hustle as a solopreneur. I think there are real challenges with working from home for a lot of people, as we all know. I mean, there certainly have been no secrets yes. through COVID, but I think after this there will definitely be a culture of more understanding and more tolerance as well from businesses.
Lovely. I must say, I appreciate that. I understand the need for professionalism, but people are people, and they have people in needs. Yes. They have children who will walk in the middle. In fact, I had a call. I was a panelist on the call, and thank heavens, only in the prep call, my dog jumped up and shoved his nose in front of the camera because he was wondering how the light smells. And people could laugh it off. A couple of years ago, that wouldn't happen. But while we're talking about performance management and how we set specifically younger team members up for success, the other important question there is, how do we manage team engagement in blended workforces, especially when not everyone is on the same playing field? So someone's at the office, someone's work from home, someone's on a different continent. How do we do that?
Yeah, so I think that I think time zones actually are a very real challenge for businesses in this blended workforce. And I think a blended workforce allows businesses, there's so many advantages, and one of the main advantages really is that it allows businesses to pick and choose talent, from any geography. But with that comes a time zone challenge for a lot of businesses. And, for somebody who is, for somebody who's working in South Africa who sends off a message to, to somebody in Canada, for instance, and then they have to wait until the next morning for that message to come back, I think that can be really, really frustrating. And I think the way that companies need to improve engagement is, firstly, I think it's definitely around culture. So there's got to be a culture of tolerance and patience. I think that's important. I think also there needs to be concerted efforts that are designed that allow people to come together and socialize virtually. So I know at the moment big talk is actually all virtual holiday parties, but there are definitely things that can be done really successfully. I mentioned the virtual water cooler conversation, and actually I think that's a great idea. I think if that's designed properly, and you can have people from two people maybe who are working from home, and a core function of somebody who's maybe in the office, and perhaps a manager who's involved in the project, and they can all get together around a virtual water cooler. and they can socialize, I think it increases engagement, because at the end of the day, when we feel we're part of a team, that accountability comes naturally when you feel you're part of a team and you want to deliver, and not just for yourself, but you want to deliver because you don't want to let your team down. You want to do good by your team. So I think by increasing engagement virtually, you can get the best results out of people. And I think there's so many other things that you can do. There are virtual team buildings. There's so many different things that you can plug into. I think the issue though is that when you're working with people who are billing per hour, so if you're working with freelancers, for instance, who are billing per hour, it's not always feasible and it's not always possible to hook them into the team unless you're prepared to pay those fees, that they are charging. The other thing is that not all of them want to be part of the team. They want to come and they want to do a job and they want to move on. So I think you've got to be really careful as a business, actually. I think you've got to assess the work they're doing, how long they're going to be there for, whether they need to be part of the team or not. And if there's a need for them to be part of the team, then I think that's a different conversation with them up front, But I think if they don't need to be part of the team and it's not critical that they're part of the team, you don't need to force your engagement on them, and they don't need to be part of the water cooler chats or the virtual team building or the virtual holiday party or whatever it is you're holding to try and create some engagement.
And I think that's such a vital point that you raise. I personally know of a couple of contractors that I worked with that certainly said, look, I'm a professional. I know what to do. I don't need the rah-rah. I just do my work. I'm part of the team meetings. I'm part of the team interactions. I'm part of the global team list. But the social stuff, I don't need. And you're so right that we do need to respect that, because I think often companies do that to bring younger professionals on board and make them feel part of something bigger. And at a certain level of maturity, I think people just sort of go, thanks, but I can just do this on my own. Yeah. But Caryn, you were speaking now about this, this respect, almost as like this, you have to individualize and understand all the ramifications for each person. But what about the legal implications around a blended workforce? Because some of us can work from home, some of us can't, some of us can take leave, some of us can't. Tell us a bit more about that. I know we don't have time to go into every country's details, but give us a bit of background there.
So I think it depends again on how you engage people. So again, freelancers, they're there to deliver, and you pay them for what they deliver, and they move on a lot of the time. And then there's the independent contractors, and there's a bit of a blurred line, I think, about how long are they working for you. There are definitely risks for the business if they don't do it properly, and there are risks for the contractor too. And then there's the outsourced function, and then there's the personal service providers. There's so many different options and so many different ways companies can engage people. And I think it's important that companies do get legal advice on this type of thing, because it can be a minefield. But if you know what you're doing, it's actually not that complicated. I just think maybe we've been held back from doing this in South Africa because it takes such an operational just operationally it's quite heavy, I think, on the business to pull it all together. It's not a case of going through one interview process, this at least the same interview process with every person you meet, and then churning out the same contract and going through the same onboarding process. So these things are different depending on who you're engaging with, the level of engagement, the length of the contract. You might find that actually these people are employees, but you need to pay them hourly because you don't know exactly how much work they're going to be getting, and so you can't commit to a monthly retainer. So I think that legally companies should be seeking advice on how to do this properly. And I also think that as HR practitioners, there's going to come a time where we're going to start needing to express how important it is that actually our labor law in South Africa, I speak for South Africa only, but how important it is that our labor law starts making provision for this kind of thing. There are 3.9 million South Africans who are currently in this gig economy. I would say that's quite a large portion of our tax base. And I think that if our labor law doesn't get it right, I think South Africa is losing an opportunity there. So at some point, we're going to have to catch up with our labor laws. And I think as HR professionals, we're going to start needing to petition to make sure that happens.
I also think that when you speak about that, the one thing that does come to mind is our incredibly high unemployment rate. And is there a way to shift things so we can make more use of people so that we could reduce that unemployment rate because of gig work? And that would be such a bonus in our environment.
So I think it stops people as well, is technology, I know when, I know when you and I work together, logistically, there is a lot of work to get around when you have people working for you remotely and you need to suddenly start couriering laptops around the country, sometimes the world. You've got to get them set up remotely from an IT perspective. Like, there's lots to think about logistically. And I think, I think companies that are not properly set up from a tech perspective, it's their downfall, because it limits the way they can engage, in a blended workforce environment.
You are so right from a tech perspective, but I also think there's another perspective, and that is if manager and employee engagement isn't right at the office, it's so much more difficult to maintain that engagement when we're separate. So maybe there's another aspect that needs to be properly set up. What are our policies? What are our procedures? What can and can't our leadership do? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that it's, GitHub do this really well because they're an all remote workforce. They have complete transparency of their handbook and their policies and procedures. So actually, they do that really well. I think those things need to be communicated to your external workforce if you are engaging people who are part of your business. And I say part of just in the way that they are not freelancers who are going to be moving on the next day or after a couple of hours. But if they really are going to be part of your team and they're going to be part of your organization for any period of time, they also need to understand those things. They need to understand the parameters of what types of behavior are acceptable, how you need to present yourself on a video call, for instance. The times that you might need to be available if that was relevant, the way performance reviews are done if that's relevant to them as well. So yes, I think there is lots. There is definitely lots to get right as far as that goes. And I also think though that blended workforces, I think, work well when it is a strategy that is employed throughout the business and not limited to one particular tier in the business. So if this is only limited to, I don't know, say your senior managers, or even worse, maybe your junior managers, it's not only is it unfair to the rest of the business, but it's never going to be successful. And the reason why it won't be successful is because people feel like if the person that they need to impress, i.e. their manager, and the person who's responsible for their salary increase and for their promotion is at the office, they're going to want to come into the office and get FaceTime with that individual. And so this can only work well, I think, in the type of environment where companies are doing this from the C-suite right through to the most junior staff member. A good way to employ this is that for anyone who starts in the business, to actually give them a certain amount of time in office so that the culture permeates with them, or the engagement permeates with them, so they feel like they're part of the organization, and then to move out into a full remote working environment, whatever that might be. But understandably, that's not always possible because it depends on the geography. And you might have somebody in a different geography who's not in your head office location, and so that's not possible. But that is one way of managing it successfully and making sure that there's permeation and assimilation of culture and values.
Perfect. And also, I suppose you spoke about water coolers or the virtual water cooler earlier, and we're talking about manager-employee engagement. It's as important that manager makes the effort to do one-on-one contact sessions with each employee individually. What do you think about that?
So I have read that sort of this is, this period of working from home for a lot of managers has been more demanding on them, particularly checking up on their individual employees in their team, or the people who are working in their team, should I say that, because it could be any number of ways that they've been engaged. But that is definitely, in the office you have the opportunity to see people, to know they're working, to read their body language, to know if they're okay, are they having a good day, are they having a bad day, how they're engaging with other people around them, how are they contributing to meetings. And when people are working remotely, there's a lot more effort that has to come from the manager to read those subtle signs. And so I think blended workforces, as great as an idea as they are, I think they also come with a lot of training and a lot of learning. Just as in sort of like, a couple of years ago, before somebody moved into a people management role, you would make sure that they had all the skills to be able to manage a team or to be able to manage people. And I think the same is true for a blended workforce. I think before you move into a blended workforce environment, your managers need to be equipped with the right skills and the right tools and the right training to make sure that they can still get the best out of the people, and that they're able to manage them remotely. I think it's a different skill. I really think it's a different skill.
I agree with you, and I think we're past the point where we consider that leadership is automatic. Some people can and some people can't. I think it's all about training people to be good managers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also this blended workforce can work really well in some environments, but I think it's limited. I think it is limited to the knowledge industry, to the professional services industry, and to the tech industry. For instance, it wouldn't work that well in a manufacturing or an agricultural industry, for that matter, because your employees have to be there, and the people who manage them as a result have to be there. So I think that's a very different environment, and so as great as it is, I think it's applicable to some environments and not to others. And I don't think every organization can transform into a blended working environment.
Agreed. So, Caryn, in wrapping up our conversation, one thing I do want to ask you is, are we going to go back to normal, and is everyone going to go back to the office? Or, what do the clever people say?
So actually, I'm pleased you asked that question, because I did, in preparation for our coffee chat this morning, I did have a look at the stats, because I was interested to see where this trend is going. And I think generally the feeling that I'm getting from all of the articles that are coming out and the research that's coming out is that we're definitely going to stay with a blended workforce type of environment. If not completely blended, at least partially work from home, partial in office. Some of the stats are telling us that freelancers could represent 80% of the global workforce by 2030, which is really not that far away. And another reason why I say, countries really need to start digging deep into who these people are and is there legislation to govern them, because without that, there goes your tax base. Yes. And then, just in terms of the freelance economy, what I thought was really interesting was who makes up the freelance economy in terms of skills. And things I found on that were 33% are creative skills. So your designers and people in the media and entertainment industry. 21% actually are professional services, which is quite interesting. I thought tech would have been right up there in the beginning, but no. 17% are writers and content producers, and only 15% are actually technology. So I thought that was really astounding, because when people think about the gig economy, or they think about, people who are supplementary workforces, they often think about the fact that it's the techs, but it's actually not. And professional services like you and I are really the next biggest role in the next biggest skill base in freelancing. And then a little did you know that Upwork, which is a really popular freelancer platform, bills 1 billion hours per week for freelancing.
Wow.
1 billion hours per week for freelancing. It's unbelievable. So it's just an indication, I think, of, the trajectory of this gig economy, which companies are just going to have to learn to work with rather than work against.
Yeah. I absolutely love it, but I must tell you, I suppose the irony around your stats about IT is they're the people that make us work remote. They're the enabler for us to work remotely, but then they can't, which is just, it's quite an irony. It's like, well, let me bake the cake for you, feed you the cake and wipe your mouth, but then I'm not going to have any of the cake.
Exactly. And they must continue doing it because clearly it's working.
What are you doing right now? What's exciting? What initiatives do you have going on?
Well, I suppose what's exciting is I've just joined this gig economy. So I was able to secure my first client last week, which is very exciting. And I am starting with some talent refresh and reset programs for them, which will include a blended workforce strategy. And I'm also working with them to mentor some of their more junior HR partners who they would like to grow into senior HR partners and eventually be able to run the full HR function in the business. So I'm doing some mentorship, I'm doing some strategy work, and that's great because that's all the stuff that excites me.
That is lovely. And I know they're going to have a fabulous time of it. So thank you so much for all of the input you've given. But now I have to ask you for another piece. I'd like to hear from you. We've spoken a lot about performance and engagement. Is there a productivity tip that you sort of hold near and dear to your heart?
Oh, I can give so many. Let me pick. So I would say actually the best thing that I've learned to do in my career is to plan my week on a Sunday. And I think that has helped me to, as a mom, that's helped me because it's told me, it's given me an indication of where I'm going to need to pick up the phone and say, I need help with lifts or whatever. And I think it also just helps you to really wrap your head around what your priorities are for the week. And I think without knowing that, going into the week very ad hocly, and you can kind of, just flip-flop through the week. But if you've planned it properly on a Sunday, you know exactly what you're going to achieve. So sit down on a Sunday night, go through your diary, know what the week holds, know where you need to call in the troops for help, and hopefully you have a good, productive week.
Awesome. Caryn, if anyone would like to speak to you about the blended workforce, is there an email I can give them?
They can contact me on Caryn, Caryn, at carynschalit.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Caryn. And then what we will do is, I know you spoke about HBR podcast earlier. If you do still have that link for us or a link to an article, then we can add that into the session notes for anyone who's interested.
I will definitely do that, and it's very new. It's going to be published in the HBR Review, the magazine, now in the November-December edition. So it is a very, very new podcast. So lots of fresh thinking coming out of that, and so very interesting to listen to. I would encourage everyone to go and have a listen.
Awesome. Thanks so much. That does sound good. So thanks so much, Caryn. As always, lovely chatting to you, and I look forward to having you here for another companions when, I don't know, maybe you'll write a book or something and then we'll chat again.
Thanks, Eno. It was so lovely chatting to you, and here's to all the legends.
The
legends.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So thanks, everyone, for listening in. I hope you had as much fun as we've had. Certainly, when I was working with Caryn, we worked very hard, but we really had a great time, and from her lovely energy, you can see why. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Coffee Companions. If you found us on YouTube, I think there's a button down there somewhere. Please subscribe. And if you've seen us on LinkedIn or you found us through Facebook, please like, comment, and share. And then until Tuesday, where you and I will be visiting on our own again. See you.